All right, from on the Gabon coup, we are now joined by Faith Mabera, senior researcher with the Institute for Global Dialogue. Faith, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. We have seen the emergence of a video of the leader of Gabon saying he needs some help. He says, I don't know what's going on, but urging his followers to make noise. Do we know how did that video manage to escape the military and make it to the public domain?
Interesting times. Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers. Yes, you ask a very important question, which a lot of social media users who are following the story have also asked, because as the segment rightly pointed out, there was rather an internet blackout just in the immediate during the election, in the immediate aftermath of the election. So it's interesting how he managed to actually get that message across via to the outside world. That's one of the mysteries, I think, that's surrounding this story. But also interestingly is the fact that the latest that I've also seen is communication from the African Union chairperson with the usual message of condemnation against the military takeover and calling for a swift restoration to civilian rule. But clearly, it's a fast-moving story, and I'm sure when we even wake up tomorrow, there will be further developments.
Even though the coup plotters are receiving quite an unprecedented amount of popular support, the president obviously still believes he's got friends somewhere who'd come to his rescue. Where would those friends be coming from?
Interesting question, because we know that the fact that the Bongo family has cemented a dynastic rule in Gabon for over 5 decades tells you that there's an interesting patronage network that is really deep-rooted. So perhaps he's appealing to all his the people who benefited from that network around him and around his family, and reaching out to the would-be powerful actors perhaps to assist him. So I think it's that reach out for help, feeling surrounded, and like you're saying, the jubilant celebration by crowds in some neighborhoods of Libreville show that there is some element of support for the coup takeover. But this is not something new. We also saw the similar scenes in the recent coup in Niger. And it's an interesting contagion effect that is taking place across West Africa and now Central Africa. And I think all eyes are on what regional bloc, in this case, the Economic Community of Central African States, of which Gabon is a member, what they will do next, and whether they will follow the same pattern that ECOWAS has done in the past, which is the rigmarole of putting sanctions, the usual sort of piling pressure on the coup plotters to sort of reverse the coup and hand power back to the leaders. But in this case, it's interesting because it's an indictment on popular discontent with authoritarian rule on popular. It's also an indictment on just the state of the economy, and despite being very rich in hydrocarbons, it tells you that there were deteriorating socioeconomic conditions in the country.
What do you think is the exact motivation for the takeover? Is it clear at this particular point?
It's interesting. The timing was interesting because of the appearance of the military, the coup plotters in the military on state-run television happened just a couple of hours after the announcement of the win of Bongo for his third term in the elections that were just wrapped up during the last weekend. So it's interesting that they took they sort of saw an opportunity to seize that. But as with the proper plotting and what we call successful coups, there has to be assistance and coordination by several rank and file members of the military and also people with access to the presidential palace and to the president himself. It just can't happen from only an outside perspective. So I think there is an interesting coordination element here to the angle of popular support. That is, I think, something we need to keep an eye on because also we must bear in mind that in this era of availability of information and footage, any footage and any images that come from the ground, of course, are not that easy to verify. And it's also interesting because narratives can be manipulated to fit a particular perception or to fit a particular agenda. So it's very keen to have a discerning eye over some of these matters. But interestingly, I think some would argue that there's a contagion effect that's taking place now, spreading from West Africa and now into Central Africa. Yeah. This is the second coup we've seen just in a couple of less than a month, if you will. And I think it's now raising very important questions about the demand for democratic governance and the popular discontent with authoritarian rule, and whether there is a question of a silver lining, the demand for sovereignty, the bigger question about Françafrique and the role that Françafrique plays in Africa.
If successful, as you put it, I mean, this coup would be the 8th in the West African, Central Africa area, with Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Chad, Sudan, we're talking Niger, and so forth. But if successful, what would this mean to Gabon and the population there that is struggling by and large?
It raises an important question about so that the different layers. It calls for a deeper interrogation of the social contract between the elite and those who would be in power and the publics. It calls to the demand for consensual democracy by a population that has long suffered under patronage networks, under authoritarian rule, under a clientelist state, long rule, benefiting one-man rule for so many years. So it's that yearning for participatory democracy that we're seeing playing out. In terms of what would happen then is that depends a lot on not only the trajectory and the support that Gabon would see from its neighbors and the broader, not only the sub-regional body ECAS, but also the AU, and whether the AU will live up to its pledge to not only condemn the unconstitutional changes of government in rhetoric only, but put to practice the support and the structures that are needed to not only depoliticize the military, but also ensure that conditions are created on the ground for that successful democratic transition to take place. That we are all looking for, the handover from the military to a civilian-led democratic rule. Something that's not easy, particularly when you look at certain deficits in terms of state capacity. When you look at the larger looming structural drivers, question of endemic poverty, socioeconomic conditions. When you have bigger questions of politics to do, for instance, with the distribution of wealth from oil revenues, who it benefits. So these are some of the more complex questions that I think need to be addressed from a governance issues. So on one hand, you have the governance issues. On the other, you have the larger question of the role that the military plays, and whether the idea of now welcoming and cementing mass participation in politics and depoliticizing the military, whether that process in itself will also begin to play out. Yes.
All right. I appreciate your time. Faith Mabera, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue.